Hi, my name is Marilyn Aston, and I'm the owner of One Leg Up Canine Company. I welcome you to this recorded version of our online webinar orientation, which is an introduction to all the students registered into our puppy socialization and life skills programs. The reason why we do this orientation before you come to an actual class with your dog or with your puppy is because we'd like to get you on board with how our classes work. And first and foremost, it's important that you know how to be prepared for the classes so that the class is going to be a successful experience for both you and your dog. We will also talk about the principles, the basic principles of how dogs learn, and how you will become a skillful trainer for your dog. Because even though we call ourselves dog trainers, we are actually people trainers. Our job is to train you how to train your dogs. We have two instructors here at the school. Myself, Marilyn Aston. I am a CPDT certified dog trainer, knowledge assessed through the Certification Council for Professional Dog Trainers. I'm also the owner of One Leg Up Canine. We also have Camille Gillis, and Camille focuses mostly on training our puppy socialization programs as well as our life skills programs here at the training school. Here's a little breakdown of some of the classes that we have running on an ongoing basis here. Our puppy socialization and training program is available for puppies who are 16 weeks of age or younger at their first class. And this program has a wide range of topics that are covered for young puppies, but there's always a fairly heavy focus on socialization opportunities that are healthy for puppies of this age group. We do touch on teaching, of course, foundation behaviors into these young dogs. We work really hard to establish healthy habits with them right from the start. And there is some work towards prevention of problem behaviors for the future as well. And so this program can alternate between doing socialization exercises and then moving into more foundation and prevention exercises as well. So the puppies graduate with lots of opportunities to explore and build their curious side, as well as practice being polite little citizens that are going to be going out in the world. And then, of course, we have our life skills program. And the life skills program is available for any dog who has either graduated our puppy program, or maybe they are new rescues to a home. Maybe these are dogs that have been in their home for a while and they just have skills that they need to brush up on, or skills that they just never learned in their early months. So in the life skills program, we are also working on prevention of problem behaviors. The problem behaviors at this age group might look a little bit different, or they might be a little bit more firmly established, but it is still a really important part of the curriculum. We also are working on teaching responsiveness and reliability to these to the cues that we work on. So we want to make sure that these dogs are leaving knowing how to listen and respond to the cues that the owner asks of them. And we definitely as well want to make sure that the humans are leaving the class with an understanding of how to work with their dog once the program has finished. So you do learn a little bit about how to create your own training plan and how to troubleshoot problem behaviors all on your own here. Of course, finally, we have some extracurricular classes that run here at the school, and these can be classes that shift on an ongoing basis, but for the most part, we typically have Circus School running and available. We have rally obedience and scent detection classes running and available, and advanced life skills. So if you go through your puppy classes or you go through your life skills classes and you're looking for something else to do, you're looking into some extracurricular classes. And some of these are really fun and they're goofy and they're silly. And some of these classes are more business. And we're working on helping our dogs be a little bit more formal and structured in their skills. So this is next level training for added skills and enrichment for any dog who has completed the life skills program. Oh, and we also have private training that is available for any dog who needs it. So dogs who don't fit into the group classes, private training is always an option. Private training is also available if you just have more specific problems that you want to troubleshoot with your dog that isn't covered in the more general curriculum of a group class. A little bit of information about our training philosophy. You may have chosen us because we represent positive reinforcement training. And in short, what that means is we provide positive reinforcement in exchange for polite behaviors that the dogs offer us. We do use a clicker, and I will go into more details about how to use a clicker and how it can be a successful tool in a training process. And we also use a lot of food. So even with those dogs that tend to be on the pickier side, I will give you a breakdown on how to make this process successful even for those dogs. It's also important to make note that we do not bribe with the food. So if you are standing there with your handful of some food and your dog in front of you, of course, your dog may be very well behaved. They may listen very perfectly in that moment when they can see that you're holding a high value reward in your hand. But they can be a little bit cheeky in moments where they may not see the food and decide to do a very careful cost benefit analysis about whether or not it's going to be worthwhile to listen to the behaviors that we've requested for them. So if they're being bribed, they're going to get in the habit of watching and following the food. And we want to be very careful to note that this is not something that we're going to be practicing in the training classes together. We will be working with slightly different mechanics, and you'll see that a little bit later on too. We also don't advocate for adversive training methods. We don't use pinch collars, choke chains, electric collars. These tools are not something that we allow in the school, and we don't have any reason why it should be necessary with the approach that we're working through. Dogs tend to respond quite well with it. The information that you'll get in class and the training approach that you will be taught is all based on science. And you will get the science of this a little bit later on in the webinar. But just make note, it's not urban legend. This is all based around learning theory. How these group programs work: you're going to be coming to class with your dog one evening a week for 6 consecutive weeks. Each class that you come to is 60 minutes in length. The puppy classes, usually training is a little bit less. We would be doing training maybe for about 45 minutes. And then, of course, we always have the puppy playtime as part of that class as well, just because puppies can't usually focus quite as long as an older dog can. Every class that you come to has a set theme, and we are covering key topics. And so just making sure that you are doing your homework in between classes as much as you're able. This allows you to come to the next class prepared to expand on those exercises with your dog. So the more homework you're able to get in between classes, the more we're able to help you progress through the work together. But if you are feeling stuck while you're working at home or you have questions, then we encourage you to send questions through email. You can even send us a video of your homework, and we are happy to provide feedback based on that as well, especially if you're feeling stuck, or even if you just want to send us some happy success videos. We always love seeing those too. Please only bring your dog to class if they are feeling 100%. If your dog has been coughing, if they have been lethargic, if they are maybe they have loose stool, they should stay home. And we ask that you continue to follow along in your PDF booklet so that you can keep doing the homework at home and not miss out on the information provided. But you can also send a family member or come yourself without the dog. So feel free to audit the class so that you're not missing out. And those are options that are available to anyone who can't make a class. So we, of course, encourage you to come to all 6 classes because there's key topics, like I said, in each class, and it is not ideal if we miss out, but if life gets in the way and that happens, or if your dog is not feeling well, then those are some options that are available to you. About some rules here at the training school: our training hall is located at 52 Victoria Road South in Guelph, which is right sort of at the corner of Victoria Road and Elizabeth Street. When you arrive here at the training school, a good rule to remember is to please give space to the other dogs. and not necessarily assume that the other dogs are as friendly as your dog might be. With group classes, we obviously don't have any aggressive dogs coming, but for some dogs, they might not appreciate another dog right in their face, especially if they are already feeling a little uneasy about where they are or what we're doing here in this strange facility. And this is something that's good to remember for life in general as well, because the last thing that you want, especially for little puppies, is for them to get a bad experience because another dog snarked at them when they got a little too close. So, just a reminder to make sure you're giving everybody their personal space, especially when entering and exiting the school. There is a space to the right of the building as you approach the front door that can be a space if your dog needs to go to the bathroom. Just please make sure you tidy up after your dog there. This is a shared space. And if you are coming after a day of work, please also just make sure that your dog has had opportunity to go for a little walk and decompress before coming into the classroom. Now, especially after you've come to a class or two, it can be helpful to remember that the moment you bring your dog out of the car, the moment training begins. So before you even collect your dog's leash, put on your treat pouch, make sure you have your clicker ready to go. And as you go to bring your dog out of the car, start encouraging them to offer polite behaviors. This can become a very exciting environment for them. And so it also means that's a great place for us to be practicing healthy habits and teaching them the behaviors we want them to offer anytime they're in a new space or anytime they're in an exciting environment. This is a good example of our dogs who are learning every second that they are awake. So when we are not training our dogs, they're learning habits that potentially we don't want them to learn. They come out of the car, they're in a new or an exciting environment, and maybe they pull us to the door. They pull us into our training space in the school. And then once we're in the school, we're now switching gears and asking them to be polite. So with that as an example, it can become confusing for the dog when sometimes we're asking for polite behavior and other times they can get away with doing their own thing. So if you are approaching every situation with an opportunity to train your dog and show them the behaviors we want them to repeat and we want them to learn, then this will make your training experience much easier to transport outside of the school environment. Now, when you come into the training hall, we just ask that you go directly to your training workstation, and we will show you where that's going to be on any given night. But you'll get an idea after your first class or two where to go. And immediately you can start engaging your dog. So focus on your dog. Don't worry about what the other dogs are doing. Just pay attention to helping your dog to settle in. You can place your mat down on the ground and take out the items that you have for helping them to settle and to focus, and immediately start building those skills for them, which again is something that you will learn more involved in the training program itself. But once those skills are available to you, this is a great place to practice them. And finally, please be on time. Each time a dog comes into the class, it does disrupt the other dog's learning experience. So for late dogs, you might find occasionally that the door could be locked if you're too late. So you can always come in without your dog and check with us if you're going to be late, or ask us if you know that there's a class that you're going to be late to, and maybe we can set something up to make that work. But please just try to be on time for your classes to avoid disrupting the learning environment for everybody. Here's your checklist of items to bring to class. Now, this is potentially the most important slide in this presentation. You want to make sure that you're coming to class prepared. So 200 to 300 pieces of food that your dog absolutely loves. Yes, this is a lot of food, but we do a lot of repetitions in the class, and it's always better to have too many pieces of food than not enough and end up running out halfway through class. So 200 to 300 pieces of food. will pretty much guarantee you get through the class without any problem. You want this food to be something that is soft. So please avoid anything hard or crunchy that your dog has to stop to chew, and pea-sized. So cut the pieces of food quite small. Aim for as small as you can cut them if you would like, but the smaller the food is, the more opportunity we have to reinforce polite behavior before we fill your dog up or they start to get bored of the process. So if we can keep the food interesting, if we can keep it soft, if we can keep it small, then that allows us to get the most out of our hour together. If your food is really high value in a new environment, you're obviously going to have much better success. So the food that you typically train with at home or in your neighborhood at home, we don't recommend using for class. You can save that for other training. When you're working at home or you're working on your homework, feel free. But when you're working in class or you're working in new environments, you want something that is going to be more interesting for your dog. So something brand new, something novel, something they rarely get access to. That's the type of stuff we're looking for. And we want it to be obviously something your dog absolutely loves. Then when you come into class, just make sure that these pieces of food are already cut up, they're already in your pouch, all ready to go. And that way we know that your dog is going to be set up for success as soon as they enter the learning space. The treat pouch that we want you to use should be something that your hand fits really easily in and out of. Pet stores certainly do sell treat pouches. You can also get them online at various places. You might have a fanny pack or something kicking around home that you can use, but you want to make sure that the pocket and the opening is nice and large for your hand. Some treat pouches out there have a very small opening, and it makes getting the treats out a little bit fiddly, and it slows the process down, and a lot of humans can find that frustrating. So keep that in mind if you're out there shopping for a treat pouch. Most of them will also have a clip on them, so you can attach them to a waistband, or some of them even come with a nylon strap that we can use as a belt, which is great. So either of those options are fine. What we don't encourage you to use would be something that is, say, like a shoulder bag or a satchel that goes over your shoulder, because each time we bend down to engage the dog, the item can kind of swoop and hit the dog, or the treats just spill out, and it's not as smooth of a process. So something to wear around the waist is typically ideal, and definitely avoid putting treats in your pockets. If you're resting your hands in your pockets, that can be very confusing for your dog if they're also used to food coming from those spaces, and it starts to gray the areas between training and bribing your dog. Of course, also the pockets can be hard to get food in and out of. They're not nice. They're not easy to use like the training pouch. And so for the sake of efficiency and clean training, we encourage you to source a pouch similar to the one in the photo here. The clicker is something that we will give you in class. You may have clickers kicking around at home, and that's fine. You can certainly bring those as well, but we will provide one for you here too in case you don't have one. You'll just have to then bring it to each and every class because you will be given just one. Also, please bring your dog dressed in either a flat collar or a harness and a flat leash. This just means no chain collars. And if you're using a harness, we encourage you to use a front attach harness. So a front attach harness as opposed to one where the leash clips or attaches to your dog on their back or between their shoulder blades. We don't encourage a back attach. We encourage the front in most cases. This is just a little bit easier for the dog to understand that we're not encouraging pulling behaviors. Of course, we will talk about how to train our dogs to walk nicely on leash, but in the meantime, using a front attach harness can be a good first step in that process. The harness over a collar is our preference as well, just because there is a lot of really important sensitive things in the dog's neck right where the collar rests. And if they're putting pressure on that spot, especially as a growing puppy, or if you have a larger dog that's enthusiastic on the leash, we can certainly cause damage to their neck, and that damage can be lifelong. So wearing a harness can help protect their body while they're going through the process of learning how to walk on leash politely. The leash really is just a regular flat leash. 6 feet is great because that gives your dog enough space to move around, but just a standard leash. We don't want you to bring retractable leashes into the school, so just a regular fixed leash is what we're looking for. Certainly, you can also pack your dog's favorite toy, or if you get them a brand new toy, then you can save that for school. This item is something that we will use for some of the exercises. We will also use it for some dogs as part of their reinforcement process, and they can use it for break time if they need play breaks or moments to take their mind off of the work and just to decompress for a bit. Then this is where the toy will come into play. You'll also want to bring with you a mat or a towel that we will use as your dog's settle tool while they're here at school. Yes, you can bring a bed for this as well, but beds typically are quite big and bulky. Really, we just need a physical floor target for your dog. So a mat or a towel works really easily for this. You want something that you can simply pick up and put down as we're working the dog. And it can be something that can pack into a bag really simply that way. So feel free to just bring a towel or a tea towel depending on the size of your dog. Now, the Well Stuff rubber food toy, I will go into more details on what that is in a minute, but this is something that you definitely want to make sure you don't leave at home. We use this as a settle tool for the dog, especially in their first few classes when they're really just starting to understand what settling looks like. And of course, you can bring a notebook with you. There is a lot of information that we talk about and little details in the exercises that you might find helpful to write down. So I encourage you to bring a notebook and a pen. You can feel free to also take notes on your phone if that's how you prefer to do it. Just as long as you have somewhere to keep track of your notes, then that's what you want to plan for. Your first password is treat pouch. A little bit more about the rubber food toys. These are tools that we use to help your dog with settling as soon as they come into the training school, because that's, of course, an exciting moment for most of the dogs coming in. And we also use them during breaks in between the training exercises. So while you're listening to me, it allows you to take your focus off the dog, and you can make sure that your dog is going to settle nice and easily in between training sessions or training exercises if you have a well stuffed food toy with an ingredient that your dog absolutely loves. Typically, these toys are rubber and they're reusable, and that allows you to put different types of ingredients into the toys. You're usually aiming for something that's going to be soft, pasty, ooey gooey, so that your dog has to work a little bit to get it out, and it becomes a bit like a pacifier that a child would use. So it's a soothing activity that is satisfying for the dog. Some interesting and lasting ingredients that you can use. Peanut butter is a common one. That's the ideal texture you're sort of going for. There are a bunch of suggestions listed in your PDF document that you would be sent for the class, but peanut butter or yogurt are common ones. Sometimes we might use pumpkin or cream cheese as well. It just depends on the individual dog, but definitely test out the ingredients in advance to make sure your dog absolutely loves it. Some dogs are very, very quick with finishing the rubber food toys, and so you can freeze them. There are different styles of rubber food toys out there these days. The typical one that I think a lot of folks know is the Kong, which is sort of shaped like a snowman. There are more challenging ones now that are a little bit more intricate and harder to solve. So those dogs that are really excited to be working and don't mind the challenge you might look for those. There's definitely easier ones as well. So for dogs that aren't really sure how to do this activity yet, or they're not extra motivated for the food, then something really easy like a lick mat can be a good choice for them. Here's a breakdown of what we're looking for with the food that you're going to be bringing to class. To train the dog, we have to have something that they want. So food is really convenient. It's something that every dog requires for their survival, and it is really easy for us to allow for quick, frequent repetitions when we're working on building new behaviors for our dog. So food is a really convenient tool in the training process. Kibble, when we're choosing our food, doesn't really work out super well. Kibble would be a pretty low value paycheck because your dog gets it on a regular basis. They're pretty familiar with their kibble. It's not new or exciting. And so what we encourage you to bring along with you would be the big guns. You're looking for stuff that is new and exciting for your dog. Often choices that a lot of dogs appreciate are things like fresh chicken that's been cooked, beef, hot dogs, steak, cheese, meatballs in the freezer section at the grocery store. They're pre-cooked meatballs that work well. You can go to the pet store and ask for rollover dog food sausages, and the dog food sausages can be cut up into small, tiny pieces. Fresh Pet comes very similarly. It is another fresh dog food. In all of these cases, you might notice that all of these are soft options. So the foods that we're looking for are soft and stinky and small. So we want something your dog, it doesn't have to crunch. So they're not going to get distracted by stopping to chew. We want something that your dog can smell in your hand and they're excited and interested in. And to get the most from each bite, if we cut the treats really tiny, that allows us to get more repetitions for the amount of food that we're feeding the dog. So you can actually get quite a bit out of one hot dog if we quarter the hot dog and then slice it up into medallions at that point. So aim for about the size of a pea. The pieces can be quite small. And certainly toys and sniffing and greeting other dogs are all other ways that we can reinforce good behavior, because these, for a lot of dogs, are all things that they want as well. So it's not just food. Sometimes we'll work with toys and we'll work with access to sniffing, and we'll work for access to saying hello to a friend or a neighbor. But for the most part, these types of reinforcements can be a little bit more sloppy. It's not as clean of a training process. We don't get as much covered when we're stopping to play in between each repetition. So that's why the convenience of food really starts to play a role for us through the lessons together. And of course, we want you to bring your dog. Bring a dog who is ready to learn. This means that your dog hasn't maybe just eaten a big full meal of supper. So they're slightly hungry. That's good. You can skip their dinner right before class. We do encourage on a regular basis just to practice having your dog set with timed feedings every day. Having your food dish always out full of kibble or with a little bit of kibble in it for your dog to graze or free feed off of is not encouraged. We want to make sure that all dogs are practicing healthy eating habits, and that means that having set meal times where the food becomes available to them is going to be really beneficial for their metabolism as well as their relationship with food. So when you offer your dog their meals, if they're prone to graze, put it down for 10 minutes, pick it up after 10 minutes and offer it again for them later in the day at the next meal time. But if your dog is otherwise healthy, typically we really want to aim for timed meals instead of grazing. So keeping that in mind over the next little while. A partially exercised dog, of course, is also the goal. We don't want a dog coming in who's been completely pent up all day and is feeling really energetic after being home alone or sitting in their crate for a little while. We want to make sure that the dog is also not really overtired from a 3-hour hike right before class. So somewhere in between the two of those is what we're aiming for, although that's going to be dependent on each individual dog. So if your dog typically does better when they're a little bit on the tired side, then keep that in mind and maybe plan to make sure they have a walk before class. We want all the dogs to be bathroomed before they come into the school. And remember, school time is not social time, which will take time for your dog to understand as well. But when you come into the class, don't allow your dog to say hi to the neighbor. Really encourage them to focus on you, focus on their rubber food toy project, and discourage socializing so that they can learn to come into the space and focus on the lesson and not on socializing with the neighbor. And fresh water will be available for all the dogs because they will be eating during the training. A few words about expectations. You as a student, the reason why you're coming to class, generally because folks want a reliably responsive dog, a happy family member. You might be thinking about trying them in some sports later on in life. We, the instructors, it is our job to lead you towards having that dog, and we really want you to have that dog. But the way it works is, unfortunately, we don't have any magic wands. And what we always say is for you to get that dog who has those nice manners, that happens through commitment to the process and by sticking to the learned methodology. So, unfortunately, just coming to class once a week and just doing those exercises while you're here at class, it's not going to be enough. The point of the training is that we, the instructors, give you, the students, the tools so that you have a familiarity with implementing these things at home outside of the class environment, because ultimately that's where we need our dogs to behave for us the most. And certainly the third party in this equation is the dog, and they just want to be dogs. They don't care about our expectations at all. Dogs are pretty simple creatures. They just want to get whatever fulfills their needs, and they want it immediately. So, when it comes to dogs, every dog is an individual, and when you're practicing at home with your dog, if something doesn't work, or if you feel confused, or you're not getting the results you were anticipating, please reach out to us. It can be helpful sometimes to send video of your practice sessions, especially if you're not feeling comfortable with what you're trying to do with your dog. Then we can take a look at that video, or we can respond to your message and give you more specific feedback for your individual situation. It is always helpful for us instructors if that information, if those questions, if any troubles are informed to us sooner rather than later, so that we can help you make the success that you're needing throughout the program. Sometimes it's just a matter of tweaking one or two small things, and then we can help you and your dog to find the success you're needing. We're going to switch gears now and run through some information on how dogs learn. Though if you have any questions about any of the previous information that I went through about the treats to prepare for class, the items that you need to source or bring, any of your registration information, please feel free to reach out via email and we will help you out. How dogs learn. It is actually a pretty simple concept. Unfortunately, when it comes to dog training, it is one of those fields where if you start Googling things, or you listen to different people or folks in the dog park, or different TV shows even, you may have noticed that there is a lot of conflicting information out there. Contrary to what us humans might like to think, dogs do not perform behaviors simply because we tell them to, or because they want to please us, or because we are the superior species. You may have even come across a word called dominance, and this is something that we hear a lot out in the dog park, or times where dogs are interacting with each other. Some trainers use this as a basis for their training, but dominance is, when it comes to training your dog, is not a method. It is actually a social hierarchy in a group of wild animals. And in light of current scientific knowledge that has luckily expanded a lot in the past couple of decades, we know that this dominance theory does not apply to the human-animal bond at all. And if you look at this dog here on the couch looking really nice and comfortable, some folks might call this dominance. I just say this dog found a cozy place to lie down because naturally it's just so much more comfortable than the floor. How do dogs learn then? So just like us, dogs do behaviors that either get them something that they like, something that makes them feel good, something that they find enjoyable or fun, or they do behaviors that get them away from something that they dislike, something that might be scary or worrisome, something that might cause pain or even mild discomfort. So if we were to oversimplify dog training, this is pretty much everything that you need to know in a very small nutshell. It all comes down to what type of a consequence happens right after your dog offers a behavior. And so if we think of it, training really is just about mastering those consequences. When it comes to those consequences, we have two different types. And first of all, let's talk about reinforcement. Reinforcement, as the word already suggests, is something that will make more behavior happen. You get more behavior when you reinforce it. And our primary training tool is called positive reinforcement. And what this means is that positive reinforcement is given in exchange for polite behaviors that the dog offers. And the positive reinforcement can technically be anything that the dog wants. Now we've spoken about the use of food and its importance and how we heavily focus on it just because of its convenience. Now, other things will work as well. Dogs who are highly toy motivated, toys would work for this process. Human attention tends to be a reinforcement for some dogs. Not to all dogs, though. It totally depends on the dog. And of course, things in the environment, such as permission to go swim or to go play with another dog, these are all positive reinforcement. And these are our primary training tools. There is another type of reinforcement that is at play in our everyday lives, and I just want to mention it here. It is a little bit more tricky to use this to our advantage in training. This is something called negative reinforcement, meaning if something unpleasant goes away from the dog's environment when they're doing a particular behavior, this behavior gets a huge jackpot. The most classic example of this in action is this image here of the delivery worker being chased away by the dog. And you may have noticed when you're out and about in your neighborhood or wherever you like to go that there are quite a few dogs in the world who like to bark from behind their door or behind a fence. The reason why this behavior tends to spread like wildfire and get reinforced like crazy is because if the dog is sitting at the window and they see the delivery person coming and the dog starts to bark and they bark, 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 because their intention is to get the evil intruder away. And during the episode of barking, the delivery person finishes what they were doing and then they turn around and they leave. And what the dog sees is the barking caused the delivery person to turn around and leave. So the person who is going door to door trying to break into every house in the neighborhood, according to your dog, just left because I barked and barked and barked and barked at the door, and now they are not here anymore. So barking got a huge jackpot. And then the next time they see a person, the same behavior starts to come out for them. As you can appreciate, it is a little bit more challenging to use this for training purposes. We could hire the male person to stand out front and wait there until the dog stops barking and then have them turn around and leave, but that's not realistic or fair. So we just want to be mindful of this type of reinforcement existing for your dog. So in short, if your dog gets something unpleasant to go away as a result of the behavior that they were offering, that behavior is then reinforced. Your second password is reinforcement. The other consequence for our dog is punishment. And as the name suggests, punishment is always going to be something that will suppress behavior. And the purpose of punishment in training is to get rid of behaviors that us humans term as bad or behaviors that we consider to be unwanted. When we think of punishment, usually we think of unwanted things, and this is something that's called a positive punishment because the punishment is being added to the dog's environment. And this is a training methodology that more traditional training methods heavily rely on. And roughly around maybe 30 years ago, many dog trainers, if not all dog trainers, would have been using things like choke chains and prong collars or electric collars. They might have been using shaker cans. They might have been using spray bottles, or they might have been using bean bags filled with coins to startle or interrupt the dog's behavior. Alpha rolls would also fall into this category. And the purpose of these tools and approaches is to get rid of unwanted behaviors fast. So there is no doubt about it that aversive training methods do work, and we do get rid of behavior fast and efficiently. But when we start digging a little bit deeper into these training methods, we now realize that there are a lot of hidden cans of worms. And these are things that we can all of a sudden open up. And it's really important to be aware of these risks. And potentially, if we're using aversive training methods, we may actually get an increase in fearful or aggressive behaviors. So unfortunately, when we're using aversive tools to correct behavior, the problem isn't being addressed from the source. And what that means is the tool is suppressing the behavior that we see on the outside, but the source of that behavior is still existing. So that fear that that dog was reacting with, that aggression, that anger, that's going to have a different outlet somewhere else. And so when we're working with aversive tools, we need to consider the consequence is very real and very likely that we're going to see an increase in troublesome behaviors elsewhere in the dog's world. So almost picture it like a game of whack-a-mole. You smack down one problem and it's going to pop up somewhere else. So if we address a dog lunging on leash, that dog maybe then can end up having trouble with not being keen to leave the house. They can have troubles with separation anxiety. They can become sound sensitive. The overall generalized anxiety levels can start to increase. And we end up with some larger problems that were either already laying under the surface in some ways, or things that we created through those training methods directly. Now, with softer dogs, we might see this come out as fear showing up. With dogs who are more confident or have a bit of a backbone, we may see this coming out as something that we would call redirection or redirected aggression. So the dog may redirect towards the handler or whoever is standing nearby, and that is a very real risk. The other trouble area that comes up for us with use of punishment is we need to be consistent. Just like with positive training, the consistency piece is what helps the dog to understand. And in this case, it also prevents us from ongoing and having to, for a long periods of time, continue to use corrective methods. For example, if we are attempting to use leash corrections to change a dog who pulls on their leash, we need to be consistent with that, in that if you go an entire weekend of working your dog and correcting them every time they're pulling on leash, but then Monday morning comes along and your dog you just need them to go to the bathroom before you're heading off to work, and you're just out trying to get them to go pee and they're ping-ponging around sniffing at the end of the leash, that can be extremely confusing for the process. And that dog is getting an understanding that sometimes when they're on the leash, they get corrected. And sometimes when they're on the leash, everything is fine and it's all wonderful because they get to sniff and roam about. They can also start to build associations where we're not intending. And that confusion, if we're not consistent about it, can also fuel the not so great behaviors. So sometimes they get excited to see the neighbor and we correct that action where the dog is getting excited. Now the presence of the neighbor maybe starts to show the dog that discomfort is about to arrive for them. So if we are consistent about it, yes, we might get the dog acting calmly around the neighbor, but sometimes they might get to pull and say hello because the neighbor really wants to say hi, and sometimes they get corrected. And this is where we start to get dogs that are worried about the inconsistencies, or we're not getting consistent behavior from our dogs at all. Now, if we are, say, really good at using aversive training techniques, what we need to realize is that perfect punishment is a one-time thing. So if you're having to correct your dog each time you see the neighbor, that is not effective training. This is something that you may have, or may down the road realize that sometimes it just magically happens by accident. For example, you might have had an experience where there was a dish up on the counter, and the dog comes by and jumps up on the counter and offers that bad behavior, and the dish tumbles to the ground beside your dog, and it scares them. And if that was your dog's very first experience jumping up on the counter, that is the only experience that they now have of putting their paws on the counter. And so what they've just learned is jumping up on the counter is scary. They may have, however, also learned that coming into the kitchen can be scary. They may have also learned that dishes can be scary. I think for young puppy owners, we can see this sometimes where the first time our dog might walk on a slippery floor. If their paws slip out from under them, we get some pretty significant hesitation from then on about those dogs walking on slippery floors. If the first time you go walk out the back door with your puppy and you step on their little paw, your puppy now has only one experience moving out that back door, and it wasn't very fun for them. So the next few times they may be a little worried or stressed or completely avoidant around that back door. This is called single event learning, and it means that that punishment was a consequence that changed your dog's behavior in only one event. Now, that can seem a little bit too convenient sometimes, and if we were to try to use single event learning like that as part of our training plan, then the trouble that we can get into, we don't know how much is enough for that particular dog. If we use too little, then the dog is likely to just find that annoying, or they can become desensitized to things that are happening around them. And then if we really crank it up and we go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and we deliver a very harsh punishment, we may have a dog who ends up completely shut down. And that generalizing I was mentioning earlier about the dog with the dish and being scared of potentially dishes or potentially kitchens, they can also take that to another extreme and be scared or worried around coming into any indoor spaces. They can start to generalize that to certain times of day. They can start to generalize that to different types of weather or lighting or people, whoever might have been standing nearby. And there's just so much that is at risk, that is out of our control with that type of approach. So let's just for a second go back to a dog who was trained on leash by using leash corrections. So each time that dog pulls, they are given a correction by the person holding the leash to get them to stop pulling. Now that dog sees their dog friend across the street and they get excited and start to pull. And the person holding the leash delivers the leash correction to get the dog to stop pulling and being excited towards their friend. And now maybe the next day we're wondering why suddenly our dog could be not just pulling towards the neighbor dog, but barking and lunging more aggressively and intensely towards a neighbor dog. This is an example of where learning by association or classical conditioning has taken place for the dog. If a dog receives a leash correction consistently every time it sees another dog or every time it sees a squirrel, they can start to connect that it was the sight of that other dog or the sight of that squirrel that made the pain happen in their neck. And that can be why they may behave as if they're trying to get rid of that other dog now, or trying to get rid of that squirrel now, because it brings discomfort with it. Another common example of this is electric fencing, that underground, invisible type fencing. And so let's say there's a dog out on a front lawn relaxing, and the school bus pulls up in front of the dog's house, and out comes the neighbor's kid, comes down and starts to walk home. And then the dog sees the kid and excitedly, goes over, "Yay, there's my friend." They start moving towards the kid, and then they get zapped. Now, again, learning by association or that classical conditioning may take place where the dog is starting to put together that the presence of that child makes the discomfort happen. Now, therefore, that dog may start to behave aggressively towards that child or children in general to make them go away. So this is why using aversive training techniques is a very slippery slope, and is ultimately why we try to stay away from these training methods to the best of our ability. But there is another type of punishment that we will and we can use. So it is also a punishment when we take something that the dog wants away when they're doing a behavior that we want them to stop doing. This is something called a negative punishment. Negative meaning we are taking something away. So the way we will use this in training is that we will remove the resource that the dog wants whenever the dog is being rude. A couple of simple examples for this: if we're taking the dog outside and the dog goes to rush past us out the door, we might close the door immediately, and prevent the dog access to outside. So the punishment here is not that the dog gets caught in between the door, because that is definitely not what we want to happen. The punishment here is that the dog is losing access to outside, and then we just show them that if they offer polite behavior when they approach the door, that they continue to get access to outside. So the door doesn't close if they're walking calmly, or the door doesn't close if they are sitting nicely waiting. Only if they get up and move towards it too quickly, then the door closes. Another common example of this would be puppy nipping. And there's lots of information for you available in your puppy PDF manuals for those clients who have young dogs about puppy nipping. But this is where negative punishment can also be really useful. So puppy nipping is incredibly painful at times, but especially for really young dogs, any kind of attention is attention, even if it's yelling no, and even if it's pushing or shoving the dog away. There is a fair chance that if a puppy nips and we go to speak with them and say no, or we go to push them off with our hands, that we are actually just reinforcing that behavior. And we can even be encouraging the dog further, because for some dogs, that's a fun game. So by far, a far more effective method for that type of demand nipping is to remove the resource being the person that is being bitten or nipped at. So if you're playing with your puppy and that little demon puppy starts to come out with their little needle sharp teeth and they start chomping at you, the quicker that you as the resource leaves and disappears and goes out of reach, the quicker that puppy starts to figure out that rude behaviors or intense behaviors makes the resource disappear. They learn to self-regulate themselves better, especially if we are also incorporating a lot of those things that are mentioned in your PDF manual. And we can also expand more on that in class together. So this is another one of our training tools. Absolutely. We take good stuff, something that the dog wants, we take it away. when they're not behaving appropriately or in a way that we ever want them to repeat in the future. Canine body language is something important that we need to take into consideration when we're training or interacting with dogs. When you come into the classroom, we will always do our best to pay attention to your dog's body language. And as I mentioned earlier, if your dog happens to be just way too stressed in the class environment, our goal then becomes to help them to feel more comfortable so that they can learn successfully. Canine body language is a massive topic, but it is all going to come down to subtle cues. So if you look here at this directional arrow that says emotional arousal, if you look then at the behaviors that are marked out in green at the bottom of the arrow, these are what we would call calming signals. These are signs that your dog is working to calm themselves. They're communicating that they have a need to settle, and they are letting us know they are not completely okay, but they're working on it. Then we have warning signs, and our warning signs are listed here in orange and yellow. And these are what typically is going to be leading towards the end of the arrow, which would be, of course, a bite. So our warning signs are what the dog likely considers to be very clear communication of please stop, let's go home, please back off, don't do that, and just plain old no. Sometimes these warning signals can be easy for us humans to recognize. Sometimes they happen so quickly we don't even pick up on them. But it is an important thing to really start to notice and to look for these things, even if your dog has never escalated towards a bite. Because warning signs are really important communications that many dogs uh, access on a regular basis. As we progress towards the top of the arrow, we can see that dogs would be becoming more emotional, and we're definitely leading more into problem area. So if we are able to notice, recognize, name those subtle signs of stress in the yellow and green areas, then we are more likely to be able to interrupt this progression towards the top of the arrow and towards a bite. For those of you who are registered into puppy class, during our puppy play times, you will see that your instructors spend some time to really help the handlers to notice these subtle cues, to see what the dogs are telling each other, because there is always a wealth of information available right in front of us when we're watching dogs interacting. You will often see just the standard things like turning their head away, licking their lips, choosing avoidance, choosing to go drink water in the middle of play. That isn't necessarily an accident. That is often a choice that puppy is making for a reason in those moments. Certainly, if a puppy gets a little bit stiff or gives a little bit of whale eye, as we call it, where you can start to see that their head is stiff and their eyes are turning to one side or the other, they're looking in a different direction than their head is pointing. This is the dog's way of attempting to tell us and to tell those around them that they are starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable. After all this talk about different types of consequences, let's take that information and now go through the principles of how positive reinforcement training will work. Something that's important to realize is that positive is by no means the same as permissive. We can always stop harmful activities from happening, even though we are positive reinforcement trainers. That doesn't mean we let the dog do whatever they want to. So if your dog jumps up on the counter to steal your piece of pizza, or they're digging in the flower pot out back, of course you can stop those harmful activities. But the way the training works is that dogs are part of human society. And even though we have this long coevolution with our canine companions, they really cannot know what we want, and they really always do what works for them. And what training is all about is training your dog to know what to do instead of always focusing on what not to do. So think about it this way. Every time you take a cab somewhere, usually when you get into the car, you will tell the cab driver where it is you want to go. You'll give them an address. But what if next time you were to take a cab, you didn't give the address to your cab driver? You just have them start driving, and every time they made a wrong turn, you just give them a good old slap on the cheek. You might eventually get to your destination, but it will be much, much slower and much, much more frustrating. And I'm willing to bet that certainly that cab driver won't be willing to drive with you ever again. And this is sort of what our training is all about, is shifting the perspective and focusing on teaching the dog what to be doing. Here are 3 examples that we do focus on in our classes. Instead of jumping, especially in moments when a dog is excited to meet a person, we teach them something called sit to greet, which means we would like you to park your bottom on the ground, and that is how you're more likely to get attention. Instead of pulling on the leash, we teach our dogs to walk politely beside us. This is something that we call polite walking. And with puppies, instead of doing the crazy nipping, we do have exercises where we teach them to use their mouths gently. When it comes to successful training, timing is everything, and that is why we use the clicker. And that is also why the dogs really thrive when we use the clicker. So the clicker is just a small handheld box that has a button on the top, and when we push the button, it makes a pop or a click sound. And that sound is able to be very precise about the moment that we are rewarding the dog. And after the click happens, food always follows. So every single time you click, you're going to feed your dog a treat, and you'll see here in the video. Okay, so here's a little video on how to use the clicker and what proper mechanics look like. So this is my dog Goose, and I want you to note that you are always going to start prepared with your clicker and your treat pouch. Your treat pouch gets worn on your waist, and inside the treat pouch you want to make sure you have lots of very small, not chewy pieces of training food that your dog really loves. Now remember, each time you click, you're always following that click up with a piece of food. Every single time you click, even if you click by accident, you're still going to want to make sure you feed your dog. Now, the timing of your click is going to be the moment your dog gives you the behavior you like. So when I'm asking for a sit, it's the moment Goose's bottom touches the ground that he earns his click. And when I'm asking for a down, it's the moment his front elbows touch the ground when he earns his click, and then feed. The way we start the clicker for dogs who have never used it before is we just go through the simple process of conditioning the sound to them. So this is Pavlov's bell. We just practice that routine of click and treat. And on average, with the dogs that we work with, it tends to be between 2 to 10 clicks before that clicker starts to be conditioned for them. So it is a very quick process. Now, the clicker is a tool that we use to help our dogs to understand new behaviors as quickly and efficiently as possible. So that does not mean that we are reliant on this piece of equipment for the duration of our dog's life. If you are using the clicker in the beginning, you're building confidence in your dog, and you are showing them that their efforts pay off. So they are keen to work with us. They are excited to try. They are what we would call bought into this process. And then as we build their confidence in this learning process, they are excited to work with us regardless of the environment we're in. And they become really brave and comfortable with all of the cues that we build for them. So there definitely comes a time where you're not reliant on the clicker anymore. You can ask your dog for all of the cues that you have charged up and introduced to them through the clicker process without having to have that in your hand anymore. And your dog continues to have that conditioned association with the cue itself at that point. Now, do we ever stop rewarding our dog for giving us polite behavior? We can change the types of rewards that we provide for our dog. Telling your dog, good girl, is a fantastic reward for them. And we've already discussed some of these things, but this is where we would start to move to more variable reinforcements and shifting and switching what we're giving to them. So it's not necessarily every single time until your dog is 15 years old going to be a click and a treat. It can start to be changed between, here's a stick, or I throw the ball, or have your food dish. It can be, okay, welcome up onto the couch with me then, or let's walk through the door together. We start to introduce other types of reinforcements into the process once we have their confidence around the cues themselves. Of course, if at any point you want to introduce new behavior for your dog, or if you want to refresh old behaviors, or you just want to have some training fun with your dog, the clicker is always available to you. You can always go back to it, but it's not something we're ever tied to. I also just want to point out that nobody works for free, especially when we're doing harder jobs. We typically expect a bigger payoff, and dogs are no different to that. So, even if your dog is 10 years old and you're walking through the woods and you call them over to you after they've been chasing after a herd of deer, or you ask them to leave it when they find a rotting carcass on the side of the road, and they listen and they respond confidently, I would encourage you to still pay your dog for those amazing behaviors, because we never want their behavior to change. So if you like what you see, show your dog you appreciate what they did and pay them for it. Over time, if we're kind of slacking in our payments, then our dog's behavior can start to become weaker. And as trainers, certainly we see clients that come in with 6-7-year-old dogs that used to be really sharp and confident with everything they were doing. And one of the biggest reasons that starts to shift is because we take for granted that our dog now just knows it, and we stop rewarding them. So don't ever stop rewarding your dog. Just change maybe the way you're doing it, but pay attention to whether or not your dog is still really excited for the rewards that you're offering them. If our boss stopped paying us one day, we might reconsider working for them at some point too. Your third password is paycheck. There's a sequence of training that we follow when we're teaching a dog new behaviors for the first time. And the first stage of that process is just to help our dogs to get the behavior that we're needing. We do use a couple of different tools for that. So we would use either capturing or shaping, which you'll learn about in the training classes together. And we also will use hand gestures. So gestures that we use to guide the dog into position and give them a bit of a hint about the action that we're looking for them to practice. At this stage in the game, there are no verbal cues. So we're not saying anything to the dog. We don't want to confuse the process, and we don't want to accidentally name the behavior something that we didn't intend to name it, because dogs work very well with pairing and association. So at this stage, we're just practicing, for example, helping our dog moving their body from a stand into a lie down behavior to teach them down. We might be moving from a sit into a lie down behavior to teach them the down, but we're not saying anything to help them just yet. In the next stage of the process, that is when we're going to name the behavior. This is where we give it a verbal cue, and a verbal cue is the word we choose to tell our dog what it is we want them to do. So in this stage of the process, we're going to teach the dog how to speak English. If we think of it like that, dogs are not very good at linguistics. So they learn quite well through that association, but without our help, they're not likely to figure it out in a way that is reliable. So we want to pair the action of moving, for example, into a lie down behavior with the word we want to call it, which is down. So we're going to say the word one time, down, and the dog is probably going to stare at us like, what on earth does that mean? And then our hand is going to guide them into position just like we've already practiced. And through repetition of pairing those two things together, of us saying the word down and then guiding them into position, they start to figure out, okay, the word down means move my body towards the floor. So the dog will then begin to anticipate the next move. They will start to figure out, okay, the quicker I lie down when my human says that word, the quicker I get access to my reinforcement. So at that stage, we don't even have to use a hand signal if our dog does not need it. It is important to remember that when you're at the stage of naming a behavior for the dog, it's really helpful for them if we're not repeating ourselves. And remember, I said dogs are not very good at linguistics. They work through pairing and association. And so when we're helping them to understand that the word down means lie down, if we say that word over and over, Rover down, down Rover, Rover down, and then we guide them into position, the dog is starting to learn that sometimes we say the word 4 times, and that's what lie down looks like. So now we're in the habit of having to say Rover down, 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 and then Rover might lie down. So if your goal, and most folks' goal is this, is to have your dog responding to you the first time you ask them to do something, then let's start that practice from the very beginning and show them when we say a word one time, it's then followed up with the action. Okay, now the last stage of this process is proofing that behavior that we've now spent time teaching them. So dogs don't generalize super well, meaning whatever behavior we've maybe taught them in their kitchen at home, in front of the fridge, practice really, really hard in this space. And then we go to take it on the road and we're out at a family barbecue and we ask our dog to say, let's go back to the lie down. We ask our dog to down while surrounded by some people and dogs and kids having fun. Our dog might not be successful with that in that space. And that's because we haven't taught our dog how to work around distractions yet, if all we've ever done is practice in our kitchen at home. So in order to help our dog to generalize their behaviors nicely, we want to make sure that once they understand what lie down looks like, we then take it on the road. So we might walk down the street and it's a nice quiet neighborhood. We're just in a different space without too many distractions at all. And we would go back to that practice of guiding our dog into position. And if they're showing us that they're able to get that behavior in stage 1, then we would move back to stage 2 where we're naming the behavior again, because now we know our dog is able to be successful. So once we get that in a quiet neighborhood, perhaps we might go to a park where there's some kids playing in the playground and we might work across the field from them. Or we might go ahead and work near the neighbor who's outside washing their car. Or we might go to a store and stand down a quiet shopping aisle and work down the aisle where our dog can be practicing in all these different spaces. And if they get really good at that and they're responding really nicely, then let's increase the distractions even more. Let's beef up the challenge a bit. So then we might be practicing closer to new people. Maybe there's a visitor who wants to say hello. Maybe we are standing at the cash register at the pet store surrounded by interesting people and potentially some smelly treats, and we can practice the behavior in that space as well. Now, if at any point our dog appears to be struggling, they're not responding in a way that we know they're usually able to do, that's a hint to us. That's a hint that our dog is in in a situation that they currently are not able to process quite how we're hoping they can. So if we simply just go back to the first stage in the situation, we can help our dog to put this together. So we take out our hand gesture, guide our dog into position, being really careful not to use the word, or certainly not to overuse the word. We can bring them back to the focus and the success that we know they're able to have. And then the next time we go to ask them in that same situation, they're going to remember that success and they're going to understand what it is we're asking them to do. So they're going to have much cleaner responses. We're going to have a much more reliable dog. And this is where we get that dog that so many of us want, where we ask them to do something one time and they're able to do it. A little summary here. We all want your dog to have a successful learning experience. And so there are important steps that we have to take to make sure they are set up for success. One of those steps is ensuring that every single time we click, you make sure you feed your dog before you click again. So it's every click gets a piece of food, no matter what, even if we click by accident. And that's what will help your dog to understand exactly what it is we are asking them to do. You also want to make sure you're going to be prepared for class. So bringing those items on that checklist. You want to make sure you're going to be prepared when you're heading out into the world with your dog. So having your training tools with you and remembering that your dog is always learning, even when we're not training them. So regardless of what you're doing with your dog, they are learning from that. So we might as well be spending our time teaching them the behaviors we want them to know for the rest of their life, instead of letting them figure out habits that they find pretty fun, that they might carry with them for the rest of their life. Your dog is always communicating with you. It's up to you to learn how to listen to your dog, and that can take some time, and it can take some studying, and it can take some good observation. But it is really helpful for your dog if we take the time to learn what they're saying when they're communicating. You want to make sure you keep your homework training sessions short and successful. So always finishing your training sessions on a positive note while your dog is still keen to keep working. That's a really good way to make sure when you come back to your training, your dog is going to be just as excited to start up again with you. And when in doubt, please check your training manual. There's tons of information in there on all sorts of common topics that a lot of dog owners are dealing with. And of course, you can reach out to us for help if you're not finding the answers in your manual. And enjoy the process. We want you to have fun with your dog. You are learning to build a relationship filled with trust and understanding. And there's just nothing bad that can come from that opportunity. Your next steps from here. Email us the 3 hidden words from this orientation webinar. And once we receive those 3 hidden words, you're going to receive the class confirmation email, including your dog's training manual. Once you receive that training manual, feel free to take a look at it. There might be some answers to some questions that you already have in that manual. And then I want you to start preparing the required class supplies. When you're preparing your class supplies, make sure you're including a signed copy of the service agreement that you have already in your emails. It's in there as a PDF. And puppy owners, make sure you're including a copy of the vaccination records for your puppy. So those must be up-to-date vaccination records before your puppy can attend class. They do not need to have all of their vaccines. They just need to be updated with their vaccines. And then finally, come and join us in class. And that's everything for the webinar. Thank you for sitting through this with us. If you have any questions at all, please reach out. We are more than happy to help. And at this point, we're just really excited to be seeing you all in person.